Evolved Godzilla. Godzilla's newest form was featured in the newest installment of the monstrous Godzilla x Kong. Shining like two twin stars, his power was something Monarch has never seen before. 5 years ago, we had the introduction of the MonsterVerse's Burning Godzilla. The most powerful version of the MonsterVerse's Godzilla we'd seen so far, easily doing what he couldn't when he was already amped. He needed a second amp to eviscerate Ghidorah. Both of these Godzillas showed to be extremely powerful, and well, the Godzilla fandom does what it does best when it comes to things like this and started debate. Personally, I side with the argument that Thermonuclear is the more powerful version, and well, I'm here to explain why he would beat his pink counterpart, despite the poll results definitely not being in my favor. Before we actually dive in, I'd like to make a small disclaimer that yes, the art book of Godzilla x Kong is coming out on June 25th, and could very well provide us information that changes the outcome of this debate, and I'm very willing to accept that. We also have to wait for the Japanese theater programs of the film, as they would also provide further information. With that all out of the way, we'll be going over what caused them to enter their forms, baselines and power levels, the opponents they fought, and many other points. This isn't going to be your standard point system fight, rather me just discussing and going over various points and generally comparing the two. First off, let's go over what caused them to enter their power-ups. Evolved Godzilla absorbed the French power plant, Tiamat's DNA, and absorbed energy from her lair. You might be wondering why Scylla isn't included on this list, and well, that's just purely headcanon. He killed her and went to sleep in the Colosseum. Could he have absorbed the radiation? Maybe. But did he absorb the radiation, the male Muto or the female Muto, when he killed them in 2014? We don't even know, so this is just purely headcanon. Godzilla, before going thermonuclear, took in a modern day nuclear bomb and absorbed Mothra's life force. First off, let's compare the power plant and the nuclear bomb. As we see in France, Godzilla absorbs this radiation. When attacked by the drones, he releases a nuclear pulse to get them off of him. Comparing that to when Godzilla absorbed the radiation from the nuclear bomb Serizawa detonated, Godzilla had so much radiation in him that he released a usage of his atomic breath because he was already overflowing. Let's not forget that in Boston, he was getting ready to explode like an atom bomb. This is just from the nuclear bomb. Moving on to the next requirement, Godzilla, after killing Tiamat, absorbed her DNA. Okay. The DNA gave him the elbow spikes in the pink color. He bit onto her head and threw her and immediately swam into her lair. What did he do? Absorb her radiation for a couple of seconds? Godzilla going thermonuclear absorbed the life force of Mothra. Not DNA, not her radiation for a couple of seconds, her entire life force was absorbed by Godzilla. So originally, he was going to explode, either releasing all this energy in one big wave or kill himself and Ghidorah as well. It's never been specified if he would survive if not for Mothra, but that's not exactly relevant here. Mothra's life force gave Godzilla the reddish orange color we saw, amped his powerful state exponentially, which we can see because we can see her wings in the pulses. Going back to GXK Goji, he absorbed energy from Tiamat's lair. We gotta keep in mind that this is the most energized place on the planet, as it's in a direct path of solar winds. However, we also have to keep in mind this was only for a couple of hours, as we can see the time of day hasn't changed when he rose. So let's reevaluate it. Thermo Goji required a modern nuclear bomb, which gave him so much radiation where he had to expel a shot of his atomic breath into the sky and absorb Mothra's life force, which increased his power even further. Evolved Godzilla absorbed a nuclear power plant, Tiamat's DNA, which remember gave him the pink color and elbow spikes, and a couple hours of energy from Tiamat's lair. One thing I know some people are going to bring up is the fact that if we take a look at a radiation scale, pink is higher than blue and blue is higher than orange. If people want to base this to judge the power, that's just completely wrong, because then you'd have to say supercharged Goji in Boston is more powerful than Burning, which is just not true at all. Let's also not forget that Godzilla was absorbing radiation for a couple of hours in his own lair before Serizawa detonated the nuke, and a lot of people forget about this. Keep in mind, the drones couldn't even get in because of how much radiation there was. Overall, this is definitely close, but Thermonuclear Goji definitely took more radiation. Next up, let's look at the kaiju these two fought. Ghidorah and Godzilla have fought in the past, thanks to many cave paintings and statements. Same thing for Shimo. They've both fought in the past. Thanks to an interview with Adam Wingard, the way Godzilla is charging himself up is something he did all the time in ancient times before every fight. So, we know a charged up Godzilla fought Ghidorah in Antarctica, and thanks to GXK, Shimo was the one who froze Ghidorah. So, it took the combined efforts of a charged up Godzilla and Shimo to simply seal Ghidorah away. Am I saying Ghidorah and Shimo had a full-on confrontation? No, but it's still the combined efforts of both Godzilla and Shimo to just seal Ghidorah away. Let's also dive into the novelization of Godzilla x Kong. Specifically, in chapter 1 of the novelization, it reads, quote-unquote, like Monster Zero, another world ender? Well, what's the significance of this? There have been only 2 individual kaiju, technically 3, that being the Mutos because of their potential to reproduce like crazy besides Godzilla, to be classified as world enders, that is now Ghidorah and Shima. Another statement in chapter 13, it reads, quote unquote, Shimo isn't just a titan, she's a world ender. Her power covered the earth in the last ice age. Again, well, what's the significance? They refer to Shimo as a world ender. Let's go over what we now know. We know a supercharged Godzilla had bested Ghidorah in Antarctica, and it took the combined power of Godzilla and Shimo to seal away Ghidorah. Secondly, the novelization refers to both Ghidorah and Shimo as world enders. It never says anything about either being significantly more powerful than the other. Again, what's the significance? Well, this implies that Ghidorah and Shimo are relative to each other. While Jared Krzyzewski, the designer of Shimo, has said that his opinion is not fact or canon, he's mentioned he's heavily biased towards Shimo, yet he imagines their fight as a 50-50. While yes, his commentary is not and should not be considered canon, thanks to the novelization and information of battles that happened in the past, we now know that it not only took the combined effort of both Shimo and Godzilla to seal away Ghidorah, but also that Shimo and Ghidorah are relative in power, and you'll see why this is so important later. Now, let's go over why Godzilla needed to evolve in GXK. As the cave painting depicts, Godzilla fought Shimo before. He didn't need to evolve specifically because of Shimo. The threat presented of Scar King, his army, and Shimo is why he needed to charge up. To add on to this reasoning, we all saw Godzilla get his ass kicked by Mechagodzilla due to Mechagodzilla's overwhelming speed and reach. Granted, he was very weak when fighting Mechagodzilla and would have won if at full strength. If you're interested in a full-length explanation, feel free to check out my video on that topic. Godzilla needed to evolve to get faster and increase his reach in close quarters combat, as we can see thanks to his slimmer look and longer arms. So we know Godzilla has fought Shimo in the past. Shimo isn't the reason he needed to evolve, because if she was, he would have evolved in ancient times. Same instance for Ghidorah, it's a one-on-one. Godzilla found himself needing to be amped to win against Ghidorah, and even then needed a second amp to actually kill him. Knowing that Godzilla did not believe he needed to evolve to fight Shimo, which is the same goes for Ghidorah, this further proves the claim that Ghidorah and Shimo are relative, because if Godzilla was perfectly fine fighting Shimo in ancient times, which the same goes for Ghidorah, this implies that these two forces are indeed relative. Next, let's go over what was showcased from these two forms. Thermonuclear Godzilla's mere presence burned concrete around him. He was emitting so much heat and energy to the point where he was overflowing to the max. Now, I'd like to point out something in Godzilla Guy's video. He uses the reference of a water jug, glass, whatever as a baseline for Dohei, and then further applies it to Thermo. We don't know how much more powerful Boston Goji is than his base, and neither do we know how much more powerful Thermo is than Boston Goji. Using the water jug in this scenario is completely downplaying how much more powerful Thermo is than base. Boston Goji is already overflowing, so the water jar should be overflowing already, and when Godzilla's Thermo, basically the entire table should be soaked, considering how an amped overflowing Godzilla's beam couldn't dent Ghidorah for 18 seconds, yet Thermo's pulses incinerated him in, what, 1 or 2 seconds? Another claim I've been seeing floating around is that Godzilla in Rome is comparable to Boston Goji. This is because he's quote-unquote at the peak of health and has had 3 weeks of sleep. This information comes from the novelization. Well, what are we trying to say? That getting sleep and being healthy relates to overflowing with energy to the point where you're going to explode? Amped Goji is on a whole different level. I'd also like to talk about Boston Goji versus France Goji. As we already established earlier, absorbing the nuke is absorbing much more radiation than absorbing the power plant. I know some of y'all are gonna say that France Goji is more powerful due to the cracks all over his body. Okay, this is my fault. How? These are 2 different directors with 2 different visions of the monstrous Godzilla. For example, Michael Dougherty wanted to completely retcon the 2014 design. Take a look at the beginning of King of the Monsters when they flash back to Godzilla walking away from New York in 2014. Michael depicts him having his 2019 design. So, this instance with France Goji and Boston Goji is merely a design change from the directors. So, let's go back to Thermo versus Evolved. Thermo absolutely incinerated Ghidorah in merely 2 pulses, finishing him off with a stomp. Let's keep in mind, this Ghidorah he fought was amped. While there's a statement that says he was amped by 100 times, this is clearly not the case, considering Ghidorah would probably one-shot everything at that level of power, but he is still amped. Well, looking at Greg Keyes' commentary on the situation, Evolved Godzilla is more in control of this radiation, whereas Godzilla in King of the Monsters was going to explode, and yes, this refers to Nuke Amp Goji, not Thermo, because Thermo wasn't going to explode thanks to Mothra. Another point Godzilla Guy made that I like to go over is that he says author statements can't exactly be used because of what they can and cannot say. Well, without Greg Keyes, Shinomura would be out of canon. If you're willing to accept Shinomura isn't canon, then I'll happily not use this statement. Not to mention, regardless if he says yes or no, we still can use this considering legit everyone said Godzilla was toying with Kong thanks to Adam Wingard's commentary, but once he went back on it, now that's not the case to some people. Do we want to choose which author or director's statements to take seriously? Not to mention the countless other statements used, but suddenly when it's convenient for the argument, now we can't use them. So we know Godzilla Evolved and Nuke Amp Goji are definitely comparable. Well, again, what's the baseline for Amp Goji? Is he 2 2 times, 4 times, or even more powerful? What about Thermo? Well, considering how an amped Godzilla's atomic breath, despite being fired for 18 seconds onto Ghidorah, did no visible injury, yet Thermo incinerated him in seconds, you can absolutely compare Thermo and Supercharged Evolved's power level. Let's also go over the one sentence in the novel that even sparked this debate. Godzilla jetted from his open mouth radiation that was brighter and stronger than ever before. Yes, I will agree Supercharged Evolved's radiation is higher. It's condensed into a single ray. However, what we need to consider is that Thermo is releasing more power in one usage. If they both fired atomic breaths, yeah, Evolved's would probably be more powerful, but considering Thermo releases pulses, his pulses do far more damage and release far more energy than a single firing of an atomic breath. The radiation levels may be higher, but the power behind it is not. We've looked at what they can dish out, but let's look at what they took physically. So we have yet to know how Evolved was able to supercharge in Rio. Apparently he can just pull it out of his ass. So the radiation is most likely being stored inside of him. Due to this, his weight isn't exactly changing when supercharged, and his durability isn't increasing as much as you may expect. So Godzilla almost got KO'd by Kong and got sent flying by Mothra's pulse. Hell, imagine what would happen if Thermo hit him with some pulses. Evolved also groaned from being thrown by Shimo. Now let's look at Thermo. While he lasted a very short time, what did an amped Ghidorah's gravity beams do to him? Would anyone like to tell me? Well, don't worry, I'll say it for you. He laughed. You heard that right, he laughed. Ghidorah was no doubtedly amped from absorbing the energy from not only the grid, but Godzilla himself, and all 3 of his gravity beams made him laugh. Evolved Godzilla got rocked by punches from Kong and groaned from being thrown by Shimo, yet Thermo laughed at amped gravity beams? Let's recap this section. Godzilla needed to evolve not due to Shimo, rather the whole threat that was Scar King, his army, and Shimo, thus adding more evidence to support Shimo and Ghidorah being relative. Thermo releases more power in one wave versus Evolved's condensed controlled spiral array. We can use Greg Keyes' commentary on the power levels between Boston Goji and Evolved. And lastly, Thermo is just far more durable than Supercharged Evolved. I don't see Supercharged Evolved just laughing at the amped gravity beams, especially when Shimo and Ghidorah are relative to each other. Before we get to our final breakdown, let's go over one more thing. So let's say you still want to say Supercharged Evolved dishes out more power. Okay, then why did Scar King not die to Godzilla? What do you mean, FDA? Well, I mean when Godzilla grazed Scar King. If Evolved Godzilla's power is so much more than anything we've ever seen, then why is there not a gaping hole in Scar King's chest? You know who also got grazed? Ghidorah. The first pulse went over him for a second and his wings completely melted. Yes, the pulse covered more area, which proves my point further. The best comparison I can think of is lava being poured onto you compared to being shot by a 50 cal. The result is the same. You die. The lava will melt you down to ash, just like Ghidorah with the pulses, and the 50 cal would shoot right through you, let alone make your body explode. The pulse over Ghidorah, which completely melted him, yet the spiral ray grazed Scar King and was fine a couple seconds later. Hell, he was even smiling when he was picking up the crystal like the spiral ray didn't even hurt him at all. Do you want to argue Scar King is more durable than Ghidorah? If that's the case, then that completely falls apart, considering Scar King is a similar species to the apes in the Hollow Earth, yet they can die to lava, and Ghidorah withstood the amped atomic breath, which is much greater in power and heat than lava. But you know what? I'll let it slide as an inconsistency, but at the end of the day, it still wouldn't save Evolved from the outcome. One final thing I'd like to point out is comparing both powered up forms of Godzilla stomping on their opponent. We've already established that Evolved's durability clearly doesn't get increased by all that much while supercharged. When Godzilla stomped on Kong in Egypt multiple times, by the way, Kong was definitely in pain, but he didn't stomp right through him. So why when Thermo stomped on Ghidorah once did it go right through him? Don't tell me it's plot armor, because neither of us can change that. That's not my fault. Did Evolved Godzilla suddenly weigh a lot less? Is Kong more durable than Ghidorah? Or is Thermo just more powerful? Clearly it's not the first, considering how would his weight change by just existing. It's not the second one, because Kong got sent flying and burned by half a second of Godzilla's standard atomic breath, while Ghidorah ate 18 seconds of Godzilla's amped atomic breath. If it's not that Thermo was just stronger and more powerful, then what is it? So let's finally go back to the point of the video. Why Thermo is more powerful and would beat Supercharged Evolved. Thermo absorbed more radiation to transform into his mode compared to Evolved. Thermo releases more power and energy than Evolved. To put this into perspective, half of the pulse went the other way, only half of the pulse even hit Ghidorah, and Ghidorah still got fodderized. We established that Ghidorah and Shimo are relative thanks to the novelization, cave paintings, and by looking at how they performed. Now, to break down why this was so important, which is the main point behind the argument, if Shimo and Ghidorah are relative, both Evolved and Thermo fought Kaiju similar in power. You could argue Shimo is ever so slightly more durable than Ghidorah, but that won't cut it for this scenario. If Supercharge Evolved can't even dent Shimo, who is relative to Ghidorah, yet Thermo turned Ghidorah into ash in seconds, and keep in mind Ghidorah was amped, this is further proof of Thermo releasing more power and energy. We know Thermo is vastly more durable than Evolved, considering amped gravity beams made him laugh compared to Evolved groaning from getting launched by Shimo. So in what world does someone who is vastly more powerful and more durable lose? I'm just curious. I mean, I've made every point crystal clear and even backed it up from the novelization, but hey, it's my opinion at the end of the day, and you have every right to yours, which is perfectly fine. I think I made my points very clear and provided proof behind them, and if you agree or disagree, feel free to join the Discord or discuss it in the comments. With all the points covered, let's see how a fight between the two would go. And there you have it. If it really came down to it, Thermo could kill Evolve, but I don't think Godzilla would kill another Godzilla. Huge thanks to Monstromations for creating this animation for me, as it took him a lot of time, and a sub to his channel would go a long way. And of course, thank you so much to my artist Sam for the thumbnail. I honestly don't even give him as much credit as he deserves, as his work is just amazing. Make sure to check out his socials. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if the art book and GXK theater program swoops in and just flat out states Evolved is more powerful, then so be it. But until then, Thermo would give the same treatment to Evolved as he did Ghidorah. Thank you guys for watching this week's video. Tune in next week where we settle, could Kong have killed Godzilla in Egypt? See ya!
I created a monster, cause nobody wants to see monster no more. They want shady, I'm top liver. Well, if you want shady, this is what I